I'm also recording.
All recording, and we're now live on YouTube, so now all the pressure's on Matt.
Oh yeah, I do actually feel the pressure today for some reason. I think it's because there's a lot of British people around, and that.
you, you lose your built-in advantage of the accent, maybe.
Yeah, I've got no charm now. I'm just a normal person again. It's like in Superman 2 when the other three super people come over, and they're like got the same powers as him.
That's
Ooh,
quite a
you got the
compliment.
angry beardy one. That works well.
Not angry yet.
Like Zod or something.
Give it 10, 15 minutes. It's also like above 20 degrees in the UK right now, which means I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm just melting. I'm just like, I can't take this. It needs to be winter again sooner than this.
Matt does look a bit warm.
It is, and it's just going to get worse because I've got a little AC machine, and I had to turn it off because it's too loud. So I will slowly be getting more and more grumpy.
It's a good recipe for the show.
Yeah, we're all in a good headspace. It's going to be great.
Yeah. Well, at least we'll start there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do the clap. 3, 2, 1, and after the 1, we'll do the clap. You ready? It's on the 0, Chris.
Got it.
That comes after 1 and 0.
Yeah, if you count it down. 3, 2, 1. Brilliant.
Played.
Is that a bit hard?
Yeah, I did it too hard as well. My hands feel spicy now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, ooh. Wake you up a bit. It's nice.
That's why we do it. It's actually, we don't even need it for syncing, it's just to wake everybody up.
Yeah. We used to do 0 bound countdown, so we'd do you know what I mean? Because we're programmers, but honestly, no one could get it.
Yeah, it just means we do it twice because we'd never get it right the first
and then
time.
when there's more than spikes, it's useless to the editors. Okay. That's right.
All right, so I'll disappear now. Stop video. And you guys can hide non-video participants in your Zoom. It's a setting, so you don't have to see my avatar. And I'll play the music, and then you won't hear from me until the end. Sound good, Matt?
Yeah, sounds brilliant. Actually.
Everybody have any questions or anything to say before it's officially go time? I guess not. Here we go.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Hello, welcome to Go Time. I'm Mat Ryer, and today we're talking about test-driven development. Yes, that strange process where we write our tests before we test the thing before it even exists. What are we playing at? Well, we're going to find out today. And joining me, welcome back, Chris James. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Matt. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, always a pleasure.
Well, it's twice now, so 2 times.
Both times it's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, we're assuming this one's pleasurable. It might not be. I guess we'll see.
One time it was a pleasure, and the other one we'll see.
Yeah.
Thanks. No, I'm pleased that was kind of like a test-driven development little. I feel like I failed the test a lot of times, but we got there in the end.
Yeah, well, after the show, we'll all appreciate the joy of seeing a failing test. So it's fine.
And we'll find out why. Joining us also, it's only David Wickes. Hello, Dave.
Hello, Matt. How you doing?
Welcome to Go Time.
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here.
Great to have you here.
Yeah,
Don't worry,
exciting.
it's not just us. We have another special guest. Riya Dattani is also here. Hello, Riya.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Welcome to Go Time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And I've got some intros for you all here, which I'm going to read now. Dave is a former academic philosopher and local librarian. A terrible marketing guy, and now a web developer and occasional contributor to Learn Go with tests. Interesting. We also have Chris, who's a former engineering manager, now fun employed. And you wrote that, didn't you? Learn Go with tests.
Yeah, it's an ongoing project though, so it's both a past and future tense.
Yeah, so that's a difficult one to handle for me. And Riya, you have a background in economics and tax disputes, right? And now you're a software developer, newbie, you say. and a teaching assistant. That's cool.
Yeah. So I've just been a software developer for I'd say like 2 years now. And so I still count myself as a newbie, although I think I'll be a newbie for like the next 20 years or something. And yeah, on Sundays I teach disadvantaged people how to code. So people of color or women or refugees. So yeah, fun.
Brilliant. Wow. Well, that's great. Oh, you're putting me to shame because I spend my Sundays doing nothing. What is TDD? We need to start here because this is strange. And I know when I first heard of this concept, it just sounded like it didn't make any sense. What is it? What do we actually mean by test-driven development?
Well, I mean, the brutal, if you like, simple version is it's a process in a way where you will start before you've written any code by writing a test. This is super high level, right? We can get more into it in a bit. Writing a test that describes some aspect of the system you want to build. And then when you've written that test, when you like to spend some time doing that, you will write the code that makes the test pass. Sounds a bit weird, but that's it. And then after you've done both of those two steps, you will finally go back and look at maybe the test code and the production code and refactor them, change them to make them in some way better. I'll use that loosely, some way better. And I think, very often we call that red, green refactor. Red, the test is failing. You've written a test, it fails. Green, the test is passing. I have written code to make the test pass, and then refactor, fix everything. So that is like a super high level, zoomed out, beginner's notes version of TDD.
Brilliant, yeah. Now, in the real world, you can't really do this, can you? Like, if I was going to make a bicycle and I got Chris to test it, and I was like, right, Chris, can you test this bicycle? And he just has to kind of walk around funny because there's no bicycle yet. You can't really test it until I've built something. That's not true for software, though, is it, Chris?
No, I think it works in the real world because what you have to, well, for one, we're working in the abstract anyways. We're not in the physical world because we're writing code. So, the rules are a little bit more relaxed than the physical world. But the fact that the test doesn't work at first is the point. What you're trying to do is, rather than diving into building lots of fancy code and abstractions and things, that your first objective is to figure out what you're trying to build. And that's surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly to some, a thing that people get wrong a lot of the time. And what I think TDD gives you in this first step is this kind of method it adds discipline to the way you work. It makes you concentrate on trying to accomplish one thing. And by giving yourself this kind of like North Star of what you're trying to accomplish, in theory, or what people who like TDD would say is that gives you a better chance of success.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that the test failing is kind of important in the beginning. Why is it important that a test fails first?
Because I think we've all been in places where we've written a test and then we kind of go along our happy way. And then we later realize that this test never fails. It's called like an evergreen test, where you haven't actually verified that the test fails the way you expect it to fail. And if you don't do this step, not only can you have these tests that don't actually fail for the reason you expect, but it often means that you've left some assumptions on the table. You maybe haven't quite understood the problem as well as you should have. What's great about writing a test first is computers don't deal with ambiguity. You have to be very precise about what you're going to do next. So again, that's the reason you want to really make sure that the thing you've specified is correct. You want to exercise that test and make sure it fails how you'd expect.
Yeah. So you know you're saying something important if it's failing and then it's later not failing. Then you've impacted some change.
Yeah, you've got to have some sort of engagement with the world. You've got to feel that, I'm changing something. We tend to like green stuff better because we're human, but it's the red that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like later on, when the test fails for some other reason, if you have a useful message, it's easier to act upon it as well. So when you see that, red test and the message telling you, hey, you've done this and this wrong, it's really clear and explicit. So in the future, you can quickly understand what you need to fix.
Yeah, so that's nice then. One of the side effects is you end up with a suite of tests that really they're saying something about your program. And then if you do something which has some unexpected side effect, which happens all the time, in the most unexpected ways, doesn't it? You then get that feedback from your test suite so it can help you. That's really valuable. But I suppose people get that by writing unit tests after the fact. What's the benefit of kind of writing the tests before? Is there a benefit, or is it okay to just write your program and get it working and then just add some unit tests after?
Well, the thing that people get wrong with test-driven development is they think it's about tests. It's in the title, right? Test-driven. Driven development, you think it's going to be about tests, but if you think test-driven development's like all about tests, it's almost like thinking astronomy is all about telescopes, right? The tests are a tool. They are not what this ball game's all about. You're going to be using tests, you're going to be writing them, but the side effect of having a nice set of suites and test suites and being confident in your code, it's great. Don't get me wrong, it's a nice thing, but that's like this much of the story. The story I prefer to tell about test-driven development is this is a tool to help you design software. It doesn't magically design software for you. That's maybe another mistake people make, but it's a way of building software to allow the design for you to discover the design. It's a tool to let you think about the design of your software rather than a sort of, a thing about tests. That's what it's not. Or a thing that magically creates a design. It's also not that. So yeah, let's think about that. It's a tool to help you design software.
Yeah, that is a nice point, because one of the criticisms you hear about TDD is that you end up writing weird code in order to make it testable. But in my experience, that's only led to better code. I've never looked back and thought, I wish I didn't have to test this code, then I could write it in a different way that was better or something.
Yes. Yeah. Go, Chris.
I was just going to say, I think the way I like to look at it is related to this is this whole idea of top down and bottom up with TDD. I think TDD is easier to practice. TDD doesn't say that you have to do one or the other, to be clear, but I think TDD is simpler to practice from the top down. And the reason for that is that really the tests you should be writing should be very consumer focused. Now, consumer focus is also quite difficult to pin down. Like, do you mean a consumer of an API? Do you mean a consumer of a user clicking around on a website? That can be quite hard to pin down. But by driving from the top down, it means that your tests really should read as if it was being called by a consumer. And in that respect, you tend to not have these kind of strange looking tests. Generally, you'll have tests that express the truth in terms of, when I call this thing, this useful behavior comes out. And again, this idea of behavior is very important with TDD as well. It's this idea of, we don't want our tests to be coupled to sort of implementation detail, because implementation detail is something we want to be able to change freely. We don't want our tests locking us down. And I've certainly been in projects where we feel like we're doing a really good job. We've written tons of unit tests. We've got amazing, incredible coverage and things. But then at the same time, we're all like, yeah, but I don't really want to refactor that because I'm going to have to change half a dozen tests. So we'll just leave the code. We'll leave that entire file as is. And I think that comes again from this angle of maybe going bottom up and trying to test your design, rather than thinking about it in terms of what does the consumer want? Because when you pin down what a consumer wants, that helps guide your design a bit better. Because rather than kind of imagining all of these abstractions and all of these designs and interfaces and all this malarkey, instead you're just thinking, what is this? We got a single goal and I've pinned it down precisely because I've got it written down in code. It's not just like some words in Jira or whatever. I've got it really precisely defined. Now, what is the design I need to accomplish that? And that means, again, it's this idea of discipline to writing your software, not being overly imaginative and things. It's not trying to suck the fun out of software development entirely. But I think a lot of the time, developers can be a bit guilty of dive in a bit too quickly and not really sort of slowing down and thinking about what they're trying to achieve.
Interesting. Riya, you're perhaps the one that came across this concept more recently than the rest of us. And so how was it when you first encountered this idea? What was your experience with it and what did you think of it?
So what's interesting is I learned how to develop through a software bootcamp. And luckily, the bootcamp that I went to taught us how to do TDD. So in my experience, I've always known about it, and I've always thought, yes, testing is, part of software development. How could it not be? So from my approach, I think testing is important, but I would say that I didn't really understand why. In the sense, I knew that you should do it, but I didn't really grasp the importance of it or how it would help me design code until I started doing it a lot more, like in my job. And so from my perspective, when I was doing something that's real, so writing software for a company, I think I would get really confused when I saw, a Jira ticket at the beginning, and I was like, oh yeah, I know how to do this through code. I can just write this, and this, and it would make it pass. But it didn't. But the test made me break it down into smaller chunks, and that's when I really started understanding how it would help design, because thinking of it in a modular way just made me, think about just that one problem at a time, that one behavior. So I think it was only later on did I really, grasp that importance of TDD.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about you get to really also be like the first user of your code, don't you? And so if you think about we know that, or hopefully we know that user experience is important if you're building a product, or if you're building a website, the end user experience is very important. We don't always apply that to our code and our APIs and things, but it is important because these APIs are used by people, aren't they? The first users of that are the people. Obviously, at runtime, it's machines talking to each other, but there is a human there. So, yeah, what's the benefit then of being that first customer, being your own first customer? Does it help? Does it change the way that your APIs end up looking?
I think it can change the way an API looks. It can. I mean, I'm not going to suggest it. Some people can't just roll it off the bat themselves without TDDing it and going that way. I think for me, it starts with that failing test you're writing. You should be thinking about trying to use this. Imagine this beautiful world you live in where you've got the thing that does the thing that you want it to do. And you don't want it to be calling 8 different, when you're using it, you don't want to be calling 8 different things, 5 methods there to get to the answer you want. You basically want, give me the thing I want as a method or a function. That's it. The magic box that does the thing you want. And then by writing that in the test to begin with, just saying, look, this is what I, as a person, want to be getting out of this. I want, as a consumer, want to get out of this. You're then led through, a nice API, because yes, you are, as you said, you're the first consumer of the API. In those tests are the first consumer of the API. They document the API quite nicely. API, not just in terms of, to be clear, API in terms of, say, an objects interface or a functions, the way a function works. We're not just talking in terms of HTTP APIs, which people often think about.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we mean any kind of code that you're
interface.
Any kind of interface, yeah, and it is a user interface, isn't it? Really. Yeah. So when we talked about the red-green refactor thing, how strictly do you do that? Because if you stick to it very strictly, you basically have errors to start with because you're calling methods or you're using objects that just don't exist. And in a way, it's nice because you get a kind of to-do list laid out for you. You try and run the tests. It doesn't build, so you get errors. And really, all you have to do is make those errors pass, and you'll progress it in some way. How strictly do you do that? Do you tend to write a bit of code at the same time, or what's your process?
I think This is one of these things where, you know, I definitely want to sit here and say I'm absolutely strict all the time. But honestly, I think the more I've done TDD, the more I've appreciated the importance of being strict with it. I think people, when they learn TDD, they kind of, they'll read some posts about it, right? And they'll follow the process and they'll go through it and go, all right, yeah, I get it. It's getting a bit tedious now. And, you know, maybe they'll skip a few steps or whatever, and they're thinking they're too smart for it. But more often than not, that kind of ends up tripping you up, and you start making these mistakes. And unfortunately, some of these mistakes don't become apparent until later. For instance, this idea of these evergreen tests is a good example of that, where like if you don't exercise seeing a test failure, you know, that's the sort of thing that will bite you in the bum, you know, in 3 months' time when you've lost all the context around it. And even worse, it might be one of your colleagues rather than yourself, so someone else is paying that price. You know, the steps are there for a reason. They're there to make sure that you keep focused on the particular task at hand. You know, coming back to the red step, I just wanted to add to Dave's bit. Like, I think we were talking earlier about how we don't like the red state. You know, we don't like seeing failing tests. But the way Dave was talking about it reminded me about how this is actually the chance to be optimistic about your code and actually be a bit more sort of idealistic and write the test you want to see. And I think that's a really nice step. The failing part is just a validation, right? It's not a personal attack on you. It's just, okay, it's failing how you'd expect. And then you get on to the next step. And again, I think it's really important on the next step that when we're making it pass, the strict part is making it only writing enough code to make that pass. And there's this really nice quote from Kent Beck's book about this. He says, commit whatever sins are necessary. And what he's saying here is like, you shouldn't be creative at this point. You're just trying to make the software work. Because at the moment, your test is saying your software doesn't work how you want it to work. So you want to get out of this red state as quickly as possible, because then you have the promise of the refactoring stage later. But you should only be doing this creative thought process and making things nice when you know the code works. If you're trying to make things nice and make the code work at the same time, you're doing two things at once, then software development is hard enough. And I think the thing I like about TDD is just trying to make it simple, you know, really easy to understand steps that reduce the amount of sort of cognitive overhead that you have to go through when you're sort of writing software.
I agree with everything Chris has said. I would like to put out a word of warning in terms of following the process, because we said we agree that following the process is important. Red, green, refactor. But this can be terrible. This can be a terrible mistake sometimes, because if you follow that process like it's a magic algorithm to spit code out, basically, I write my test like that, it's done. I write my code, next, refactor. Well, I don't know, but I'll rename a few methods, write another test, write some more code, refactor. I don't know, maybe I'll change the name of a few more methods and add a comment. It doesn't work. Rich Hickey has a great line about TDD. I mean, I feel he misunderstands TDD, don't get me wrong, but he says it's basically like coding, like driving by hitting the guardrails. You know, oh, that broke, oh, that broke, oh, that broke. I don't really know what I'm doing, but, you know, I'm writing tests, so it must be working and I must be making progress. This is wrong, right? If you're doing TDD like that, you're missing a trick. I'll put it like that. I don't think you're doing TDD very well if you're doing it like that. You should be looking at each stage and thinking carefully what's going on here when you're writing that failing test, right? You know, if the error message good, we've talked about that a lot. But the other thing is, what is this like now when I'm writing this failing test? Now I've got all these other tests in my wonderful test suite. Is it easy to write this next test? Is it hard? Is it, you know, am I now having to like do some weird logical jumpy bits around? Am I having to like endless helper methods in my test suite in order to get this test written? If you are, don't do that. Back out. You need now to go back to refactoring. I know, yeah, we just went from, you know, writing a new test back to refactoring, but this is fine. You might need to do this sometimes, refactoring your code to make that next test easier to write. And this idea that people have, and it's something I hear when people don't like TDD, and it's okay not to like TDD, but it's usually a thing like, you know, it doesn't lead to good design. It just leads to chaos. You end up with all these tightly coupled tests everywhere. And it's like, dude, this is not going to drive things for you. It is not a replacement for thinking and common sense. It's a tool. You got to use it. So that's that off my chest.
No, that's a fair point, and yeah, that's right. Like, it's not an aimless thing. You still are you're still responsible for designing your code. But I do find it helps me design better code. We should talk a bit more about the fact that this idea that you don't write too tightly coupled code. You don't write test code that's too tightly. I could have TDD'd this sentence. I would have failed a few times. Let me try it one more time. The little work for the editor. To be honest, they don't have a lot of work to do, so we'll give them a bit more work. We should talk a bit more about how test code can get tightly coupled with program code. How does that happen, and why is that worth avoiding, and how do we avoid it?
Okay. So I think that there are a few things. I mean, it's very hard to give a pithy answer to that.
Don't then.
Okay, fine. We'll just move on. No. So I think there are a few things that you can look out for. I think if you're happening to have mocks, which is everyone's favorite subject, there's nothing wrong with mocks or test doubles. But as with anything, if you use them too much or use them incorrectly, that can cause problems. Because the idea of using mocks, well, one reason to use mock is to spy on something, right? You want to check that something happened within the internals of the thing you're testing. And sometimes you definitely need to do that because your thing has side effects and you're interested in those side effects. But you really need to think carefully about this kind of thing, because if you end up spying too much on your code, again, it comes to the point where if you want to then change the implementation details, you're going to end up having loads of failing mocks and all sorts of tedious kind of sort of changes that you're going to have to do to go through it. I think the other thing I would say is, again, I think you're less likely to have these kind of tests that are too coupled to implementation details if you start from the top. The problem with bottom-up development is you're not really using TDD at this point as a design tool. You're using TDD as a means of writing tests. And as Dave says, that's not really the point of it. And generally, if you're going bottom up, what you've done is you've imagined some kind of design. You figured out, oh, I'm going to need a function to do this and a function to do that. Okay, I'm going to write some tests around all of that. But if your design isn't correct, you're going to end up again with these kind of problems of these tests becoming more of a hindrance than actually helping you. I think that's all I've got at the moment. Dave or Riya, did you have anything?
Well, like for me, when I'm writing a test, I like to keep it simple. And I think from like the top bottom approach, it's just nice when you have, say, like an acceptance test, and that's already focusing on something. And then you have a couple of unit tests for like something that, passes that acceptance test. And it's okay if that's failing, but it's already kind of like narrowing down what you need to do and trying to make it small. Obviously, you shouldn't write an acceptance test for every single thing, but having that approach is just it's just easier to kind of make sure that you're not dealing with too many things at once. So yeah, I think that's how I try to look at it if I ever have to code something.
Yeah, I like that. It gives you something to focus on. It helps with that focus. Some people, even when they're writing code or working on something across many days, they will leave the state with a broken test, because when they come to it the next day, you know exactly what you need to do and you can sort of get straight back into the flow of it. And I do find that actually to be quite nice. Yeah. Any other tips like that?
Well, the acceptance test will, we're talking about, top-down TDD. The acceptance test will fail for a long time. You are going to start out there with this idea of the behavior of the whole system. You're not going to get to that, quickly. So that acceptance test, it may get committed and commented out or skipped, or whatever works for you in your testing framework or lack of a framework. Yeah, that's important. And yes, I find that works really, really well in terms of individual unit tests. If you end up at the end of the day thinking, oh, well, this is the next bit of behavior I would like to implement. This is the next thing I'll write. Yeah, put it in there, say what's going to happen and get through. And Chris has got a hand up, so I think he's about to talk about behavior.
No, I was going to say, given this is a Go podcast, we're talking about TDD, but actually I would personally recommend when you're doing Go and TDD to, from a default position, use the external test package technique where your tests have underscore tests in their package name. And what that means is that they can only use exported members from the package it's testing. That has two benefits. One, again, it's this kind of idea of you see it from a consumer's point of view. I mean, in some cases, you can more or less copy and paste the test code and dump it into your own code, and it'll be basically the same usage. But secondly, it means that you can't reach into implementation detail within so it just kind of stops that bad habit of testing unexported or private things, because going outside of the Go world, it's pretty much a given that people say you shouldn't test private methods if you're working in, say, an OO language and things. And the reason for that, again, is you don't want your tests coupled to implementation detail. So that's the way in a Go world that you can protect yourself a bit from that kind of sort of anti-pattern.
Yeah. I like that too. And it's also like, even does silly things like you get to make sure that your API reads nicely. That you remember that the package name is going to be used each time those types and methods and functions are called. So it's kind of nice that you get to be that customer again the first time. So I do that if I can. I also find if I'm doing something that is hard, and by hard I mean say I've got some input data and I'm going to transform it or something that's quite difficult to keep in my mind, that having a test there which I can just keep running as I'm writing and tweaking the code, that to me is just almost feels like a cheating way of coding. I don't have to be good at coding to do that. I can just keep trying little things, do little experiments, and I find it catches off by one errors and things like that quite nicely. So I like that stuff. We've had some questions in our Go Time FM channel on Gophers Slack. If you want to join the chat, then you can do so in there. Barnaby Salter asks, do you use Testify when writing your tests? Troll emoji. Do you? Bear in mind, I created Testify.
I believe is an improvement, right? That was the correct thing to say, right, Matt?
Yeah, thank you.
The cool kids are all using is now, from what I can tell.
This is a difficult one because I'm a bit of a stickler for type safety, and my the thing that kind of gives me an uncomfortable feeling with those things is that they all take interface, right? In order to have a generalized assert equals function or whatever, it has to take interface, at least until we get generics. And I have been in situations where people have been confused because they see two things, it prints out these two things are not equal, and you're looking at them, it's like, yeah, they are, but it's because the two types are different somehow, but the string coming out is the same. So generally, I kind of don't use those things, but I don't know. I don't think it's a big deal either way personally. I think it's just a matter of taste, really.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're writing good test code, that's really what matters. Yeah. Is, by the way, which is what I call it, Testify off steroids. It does actually check the types. So if you pass in a float and an int and they're the wrong type, it will tell you that these, although they're the same number, they are not the same. And I think Testify also does that too, although I don't know. There is some weirdness in Go where, because it's an interface, you pass in types and they're changed in that process, because an interface is kind of a type and a pointer to the data. So you're actually changing the things, and so that's a rare.
I was just going to say what I mean was compile time check.
Right.
That's what I was referring to. Basically, I like to see red squiggles in my IDE because they reassure me that I'm wrong, because normally I am. So whilst they might fail, they might do that check when you run the test at compile time, they're still at that interface level.
Actually, it's a fairly good point. The first failure, the first red failure for your testing is compiling, right? You got to get the code compiling first. That's, people often seem to think it's like the failing test is the important bit, the actual running code. No, I think TDD starts at that point where I've written my magical Wonderland code there that doesn't exist yet, and now I've got to get it compiled, and then get the test to fail, and then move on.
Yeah.
I think anyway.
How about tests for collaboration? Have you ever tried writing tests for somebody you're pairing with and then switching and they implement? And have you ever done anything like that?
Yes.
I like it.
Go for it, Rhea.
So we did a lot of this at the boot camp and at work, and so obviously there are like the different methods, driver and navigator, and over there like you'd be writing the test and the code, but there are also things like ping pong, which I think is really nice. That's when you write a coding test, and then the other developer that you're pairing with passes the test, and then they write a test, and then you pass that test, if that makes sense. And I think it's really interesting because you're almost given that release from not even thinking about how you are going to pass that test. That's kind of the other developer's job, and I really like that about ping pong because you could get a completely different answer or like production code from what you had envisioned that you would write for it, and like bouncing off each other in that way. Oh, is that why it's called ping pong? Sorry.
That got recorded.
And yeah, so like bouncing off each other in that way could actually surprise you on how you design your code. So yeah.
I love that. I'd actually never thought of that. That idea that you're free to not worry about how you're going to solve it. All you're focusing on is how you want to use that code. I think that's actually a great point. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. Another important thing about TD is this idea of iterativeness. So you should be thinking about how it should be behavior focused, but you should be trying to cut the scope of the thing down to as smaller vertical slice as you can. Because the idea is that we work in a knowledge trade, right? And feedback loops help us improve our knowledge of us, what we're doing. So if we tighten those feedback loops and we get faster feedback on what we're doing, we have a better chance of success. And what I like about ping pong thing is like it feels bad if you're holding the keyboard for a long time, or if your colleague is holding the keyboard for a long time. And it kind of brings out that conversation of like, why have I been holding the keyboard for half an hour? This sort of thing should be like, I write a test for like 2-3 minutes, maybe, if that, and then I pass it to my friend and we go back and forth. And if you're not having that sort of fast back and forth, that tells you that you're not thinking about breaking the problem down well enough.
That's interesting.
I'd just like to quickly add on that as well. I think I remember when I started off at my job for software development, I was actually pairing with Dave, and he did something really good, and that was when we were pairing on something. I think we did the ping pong strategy as well, and if I would write a test, he would actually guide me to not write a test that is, which would guide me to write a test that is focused on behavior. Because, so for example, if I said, I expect 1 + 2 to be 3, he would just return the code and say, hey, oh yeah, so this function is going to return 3. And that was like really good in the beginning because, like we learned how to really test behavior rather than the actual output of something.
So you have an example in your test code, and you can just pass that test by cheating.
Yeah.
So maybe then you'll write either a few examples, or maybe you do something different. Maybe there's a loop, and you do a little 1 to 10 or something like that. So that's quite interesting. Yeah, using Go code and treating test code like it's normal code, and then and seeing how that can impact it. I think that's great. Go has testing was a first class concern for Go. Does that make it easier to do TDD, or can you do TDD in any language?
I think it does make the barriers to entry a bit simpler, but I would say it makes testing easier, right? I suppose if you consider one of the goals of TDD is to help you design, Go's a fairly limited language on purpose, right? It's very simple. There's not a lot of abstraction power and all that kind of business. So it reduces the problem space, it reduces the number of possible design solutions for the thing you're solving. So in some respects, it kind of helps you at a design because you're not arguing over abstract classes and monads or whatever. There's a small collection of valid solutions to this particular thing. So in that respect, it kind of makes design easier. But I mean, personally, I don't think it makes that much difference to TDD other than slightly lower barrier to entry, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got, sorry.
Go on.
I was just going to say, I was wildly excited when I first met Go, and the testing was in there already. Yeah, it's a wonderful thing, and I think more languages, in fact, every language in the future should do the same thing. It's such a good idea.
Yeah, I think they will. I think Ruby on Rails was the first time I saw where it was just there from the beginning, and then Go has it, and I think that is now a given. I think testing, unit testing, and these capabilities are kind of now what it's just a given, isn't it? Because we even had that before we had proper debugger support in Go. So that shows you actually, and I don't use a debugger really. Do you?
No.
I'd actually like to go back on my statement. Actually, I think actually the built-in testing does help with TDD because I like to think that the Go community, because it's so built in and entrenched in language, the community has a culture of testing. Not necessarily TDD, but it has a culture of testing, right? It gets people talking about testing and what we want from testing and things. So actually, I think the fact that it's baked in, it's just a signal to all Go developers, like, go ahead, go write your tests because it's important. And no, I don't use a debugger very much at all. I personally think just writing a failing test or just a test to exercise whatever it was doing with the debugger is a million times simpler. And I can never remember all the keyboard shortcuts to the debugger anyway. It's F10, F9, I don't know. I don't know what step in and step out means. I'm always just confused.
Yeah. Are you a good dancer?
Absolutely not.
There you go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Well, what about when you're prototyping, when you're just a new thing, brand new, you've no idea what you're going to do. You almost don't even know how you're going to even tackle a problem or even think about it. How do you feel about people that will just do the prototype first and then maybe that gets thrown away and they start TDD? Is that okay? Or would you even write tests in that case?
I have a feeling I'm going to steal what Chris is about to say, and that is you would do a spike. I think it's a really useful thing. So if you really have no idea what your requirements are and you don't even know what you're going to build and you just want to try something out, you should do a spike. And that is just writing production code and seeing how you go about it. And then once you get an idea of what you're doing, delete it, but really delete it and start over again through TDD. And you'll almost always come up with a different design to your code and probably a better solution as well. So I think that's the approach that I've been taught and I agree with.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I like what you say about that. Really do disregard it. Don't keep any of it because you don't have the protections that you would have if you'd TDD'd it. Another criticism people talk about with TDD is that they think we just don't have time. Like, we don't have time to do this. We've got to get a feature out by Friday. It's urgent. And obviously writing test code and production code is slower, isn't it?
Mm.
That was a leading intonation.
I mean, I think if we all just, took some time to think about what we do in our lives and our jobs as software developers, is typing at the keyboard, is that really the bottleneck in our lives? Like generating code, is that like the thing that stopped me getting this thing out into production in this week was the fact that I have like 60 words per minute and not 120. No, right? No, that's not. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's really important to have a loud mechanical keyboard and type quickly, just to absolutely intimidate everybody around you.
Yeah, they know you're doing your work.
Yeah, it's important. It's great. It's like great. It's like, oh look, Dave must be doing something. I mean, to be honest, it's when I'm not typing that I'm doing something. It's when I'm sitting there thinking, going, how the hell am I going to fix this? Or how the hell am I going to make this work? And
You with a mechanical
that's-
brain so that people could hear that, really, couldn't
if
you?
only I had a mechanical brain, it would just rust.
Those seasons.
But but the let me see. The again, the bottleneck's not typing. The bottleneck is not code production. The bottleneck is thinking and understanding and trying to do the right thing. And that, in terms of a bottleneck, is not going to be made any slower by doing TDD. If you don't know how to do TDD, it will be slower. If you think, the week that I've got crunch time in order to get something out, in order to, not get fired, that is not the time to learn TDD. This is a bad time to learn TDD. Don't start doing TDD that week. But if you do know how to do TDD, it is no slower, and it may be faster because, as I say, it's a thinking tool. It's a way of, leveraging a test in order to think harder about your code and the right way to write it. That's when it might be better and get things done faster. So I very much reject this idea that, oh no, the tests are going to slow me down. I've got to write a load of tests now as well as all the production code. No, you should be writing those tests anyway. I think you should be writing tested code. I think not writing tested code is not a good thing these days. And the second thing is, those tests are a tool to help you get to a good design and a good place if you're doing TDD. So yeah, please. I don't think it's a slow thing. But if people actually think and, could provide me some evidence that it's the typing that's slowing them down, then good for them. Please don't do TDD. Crack out that code as fast as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, so I agree with that. I'm much faster with TDD than I am without it because of that immediate feedback I get. I don't have to kind of imagine and keep it all in my brain. I can just find out the answer by running the test.
Jason Gorman did a little test. He blogged about it, I think, around the Roman numerals kata, where he basically spent one day doing it with TDD and then the next day doing it without TDD, and he ping-ponged between the two. Very different solutions each time. Did it over time, and he was faster doing TDD. Is essentially what he discovered. Yeah, it's a single sample point. It's slightly biased. He loves TDD, but he definitely wasn't any slower.
Yeah,
it's a hard problem. It's hard to think about.
Is TDD something that's like, you can sit there in your ivory towers, in this academic space where we be on podcasts and talk about this is what you should do? What about when you're on the ground? Are there real examples? Do we know? Are people doing this? Is this something that happens?
I don't think I don't think TDD is this as rare as people think it is. It's used in banks and pacemakers, but the most wonderful news I heard was a fine gentleman who worked on some Mars space rocket or something or other, and he said that they did their code with TDD. So not only does it work in the real world on Earth, but it works in another world as well. It is an extremely practical tool for writing software. It's not some strange niche thing. It's actually a very mature technique in terms of the software world. It's not like this thing has been introduced 5 years ago. It's pretty old. There's some really good books on it, and plenty of people are using it successfully.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, the fact it's on Mars, it's used on robots on Mars. I mean, it can't be that bad, can it? What next for it? What do you think's next for it? Jupiter? That's a real question you have to answer now.
I predict TDD in Alpha Centauri in the next 50 years. There you go. Hopefully I'll be dead by then. Aliens doing TDD right now somewhere. I bet it. Yeah.
Maybe they would be. Maybe they would be. I actually think they would be. I think if there's any... Yeah, I mean that. I do think aliens would do TDD. I really do mean that. I'm not trying to be funny. It's a bit like how mathematics, we send prime numbers out, don't we? We transmit to prove intelligent life. We do that with the assumption that they have the same mathematics. I think they'd have if they're going to be writing software, probably, aren't they? If they're advanced enough. I don't know. And I think they'll probably be doing TDD. So send in your tweets and tell us what you think. Do you think aliens are going to be doing TDD? We'd love to hear from you. Are there any gotchas to look out for? with TDD? We talked about a couple, but are there any situations where you just wouldn't use that at all, or can it go wrong?
It can definitely go wrong. I think lots of people go wrong with it, and I think, I hope some people listening to this will give TDD a go, and you'll probably find it hard, and you'll probably fail at first. It's kind of inevitable. I think what people need to really do is to try and be honest about the quality of their test code at first. The amazing thing about tests is that they're a lens into your code. We've talked about it being viewing the code as a consumer. A lot of people kind of live with these terrible tests that are horrendous to read and things, and just sort of think that they accept that. And perhaps, again, coming back to this sort of culture of fear of deadlines and things, like we haven't got time to refactor the tests, we'll just live with them or whatever. But we should be treating tests as seriously as we do our production code. And if you do that, you start to get insights about your code. We talked about test doubles and mocking earlier. A really easy thing to check with your tests is that, do you have a ton of setup code for your tests, creating a load of mocks and mocking out behavior and things? I think we've all seen tests like this where there's like 100 lines of like mock setup, and then there are 3 lines of code that are actually interesting. And people just kind of live with it, but you need to be asking yourself, what does this mean? Why does this thing have to collaborate with so many things in order to get its job done? That should be ringing alarm bells in your head. Why does this thing have to collaborate? Why is it coupled to so many different things? What happens when we change these things? It's obviously loads of stuff's going to break. So you can use that to guide yourself in terms of helping improve your design. And another trick I like to get people to do is just read your test out loud to a colleague. And it's often harder than you think it is. You think even when the test is terse, you'll think to yourself, oh, this test looks great. It's only like 4 lines of code. This test is brilliant. And then you read it out loud and you're like, I actually have no idea what this test is expressing at all. It's nonsense. And again, it's this idea that tests, they're telling you something. And the beauty of it is that it's this focused lens on a particular part of your system. It's quite hard to appraise lumps of code in your IDE in isolation. Like you see some function on its own, you go, yeah, sure, that's great. It's just some function. But when you see it being used, that's when you start to understand. So the real pitfalls of TDD really are, well, one of them is people not looking at their test code and thinking about it properly.
Yeah, I think that's right. You should treat your test code as important or more important really than your program code, right? Because that's another thing that happens is it's very easy to just, I'm going to nip into this project. I'm going to just add another test because I can't be bothered to read all these other tests. I'm just going to add another test. And you can end up with test code that's kind of duplicated in some ways, and it's testing the same thing in different places and things. And that's okay. Sometimes it's probably unavoidable, but it has the effect, you lose the effect of like, if something does break later, it's quite nice when one test fails and sort of points straight to the thing that's broken, rather than all of your tests failing and then you still have all your work ahead of you to go and figure out what you've just done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think so. I think treat your test code like it's part of your program code, and that is something that Go does well.
Test code ideally should tell you what your code does. And in the beautiful world, it tells you why it does it. But your production code is how, and that's it. That's a reasonable separation to make between the two. I'd like just one more gotcha. Well, there's loads of gotchas, but one of my most favorite ones are people who have already got their design in their heads, and then they want to TDD it. So they go, oh, I've got my design. I know what my API is. I've got all these wonderful methods in my head now. I will now do TDD in order to produce this. And they go, right, here's my method name. And now in the test, I'll write the test for that method and the next method, and just crack through it all. Basically, they could have written the test in one go. They may have written the test in one go. Why not at that point? And here's the design. And then they wonder why everything is terrible because, you know, they can't change the design, or they don't like the design, or, you know, why even bother doing TDD at that point? And this is, again, the wrong way of doing it. There's two things going wrong here. One of which is you've already thought of the design. You want to feel the design approach you as you do TDD and then slowly back up into it. Oh, I'm moving backwards in my chair. Couldn't help myself. You need to, you know, the tests will lead you towards it. It doesn't mean like the test will create it for you, but you'll see what is needed from that design. And the second thing is don't test methods. Never test methods. Well, do test methods because, you know, or functions because there's nothing else to test out there. But you should be trying to test behavior, to encapsulate behavior. Don't just think about this method does this thing. Write something about the behavior in that test. Describe it as well as you can. And that way those tests will last longer and not just be something trashy and throw away and really coupled and glued into that particular API you built. Anyway, rant over. Less coffee next time, Dave.
That's great. I like that. So don't write too much test code, because that is something that when I started doing it, I would try and just write all my test code for everything that I needed. And really, and in some ways that helps. It can help, like with the design still. And then I set about making that pass, but that's much more difficult than taking it in tiny chunks. Write a piece of it and then make the program code go. How do you do that? Do you tend to kind of keep the progressions small in that way, or do you write like, here's the complete thing that I know I need? Does it depend?
I think TDD feels right when you are working in those very small steps. And it always feels very safe. Like I think TDD feels right when you write a small test for some kind of important well-defined behavior, and then, you know, you make it pass, so you do some refactoring, you do your commit, and then you move on to the next thing. And it should feel like steady progress throughout the day. I think if you start with a test that you know, and when I say test here, I'm saying unit test. If you have a unit test that you know is going to take you hours to pass, that is when you're not doing TDD right. You haven't really broken the problem down well enough. So I think another kind of sign that you're not doing things right is if that sense of iteration and feedback loop, if that's lost, if you're stuck in the red for a long time, or you know, you're not moving forward, adding new tests, you're just kind of stuck on one test for a long time, that should tell you that you need to rethink your approach a little bit.
That's great.
I have like something small to add there. It's like, I think it's nicer to do it iteratively, like Chris was saying, because I feel like the refactoring stage is such an important bit. You know, when you're writing something and you've, you know, written the production code of it, in the refactoring stage is when you really look at it and you're not even thinking about the tests or anything, and you're actually now concentrating. It's like a state of mind, and very different to like the second stage where you're just trying to make it pass. Like the third step is, I'm not trying to make it pass anymore. I'm trying to make this, you know, good design. And like when the like patterns start emerging and you start writing, you know, code that is actually good, it could change and evolve differently to when you had written all your test suites, or not test suites, but like test unit tests or whatever beforehand, all in one go. That's what I think.
No, that's a very good point. It made me think. Do you write test code for the unhappy path, for every possible unhappy path? Like if your code has lots of if error doesn't equal nil return errors, if it has a lot of those in a function, do you try and write test coverage so that you cover each of those cases, or is there an element of really picking the important bits and trusting yourself on the rest of it? What's your attitude to kind of testing errors? It's a tough one.
Yeah, it really does depend on the nature of the work you're doing. Generally, if you're not really adding anything, right? So if you're, I don't know, you're calling something that returns an error, and all you do is just, you know, return if error, return error. You know, if you're not doing anything interesting with it, I don't know. I feel like it's not really worth the hassle personally of adding a test for that. But if you're doing something interesting in the error, in other words, if you are adding behavior, right? Just because it's working with an error doesn't mean it's not behavior. If you're adding behavior, then that's no different from the happy path, right? You know, you should write some tests around that. And yeah, you might have to faff around with some mocking to make it so the thing fails for you, so you can do the test. But again, like when that starts to feel painful again, you can start asking yourself questions around this kind of thing and go, well, is this worth it? Or is there something a bit weird about the design that's making this hard to test? So yeah, it's difficult to give some concrete advice here. I think it's one of these things where you have to put on your big boy trousers and just think about it for yourself. Do we need to do this? Am I confident? Again, I think another important thing is about confidence, right? Like if I know that this is going to work and I don't need a test and all the test is doing is just increasing some coverage number, don't worry about that. Like like this whole obsession over test coverage is nonsense. It's an interesting metric. It can be helpful, and like if it shows you that a whole particular function isn't tested at all, then yeah, that's useful. But if your boss is telling you to get 90% test coverage, update your CV.
Brutal. Well, it's that time again. It's time for Unpopular Opinions.
I actually think you should probably leave.
Do we have any unpopular opinions?
I mean, all my opinions tend to be unpopular. Yeah. I said we should do this in a pub.
That was not unpopular. Just logistic.
I mean, it's just, unpopular with everything else.
If it's not logistically difficult opinions, is it? It's
unpopular. Think about doing that next time. Logistically difficult opinions. Get the recording studio, it'd be great.
Yeah.
I can throw out an unpopular opinion. Well, maybe it's not unpopular. Maybe I am completely wrong.
We test them on Twitter on a GoTime FM account. We'll tweet them out with a poll and ask people, and we find out. And honestly, most of the time they're not unpopular, but we wonder whether that's just because you put the case so well. So the goal really is to try and get an unpopular opinion where literally more than 50% of people disagree. That's the goal, if you could, Dave.
So, okay, but not something like completely extreme, like Go is terrible. We should do something else. Okay, so I've been around the Go community for a little while, and I think I can think of something that maybe more people will disagree with than agree with. Abstraction is really, really good. There you go. It's not just really, really good. It's your job. Your job is to write abstractions. You may think your job is to write code that works, but basically anybody can write code that works. Your real job is to write code that works and abstract it in a way that means you can build more and better things on top of it. I feel I get the impression from a lot of people in the Go community that abstraction is something to be feared and avoided, that we must never abstract, and that we must write everything in a 1,000 line main function, sorry, not method, this is not Java. And that's easier and better in some way because we can now read everything. When I think that's just terrible. I think this is awful advice. You should genuinely be trying to exercise those muscles in your head that lead to good abstractions, good design, because that's what software design is ultimately. It's abstracting, writing functions, writing structs, writing methods. This is all abstraction. And if you're not very good at it, if you fear writing bad abstractions, well, try to make your code something that can change easily. Design should change. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. And also get better at it, because like I say, it's your job. Your job is to write abstractions. It's not just here to write zeros and ones. There's a reason. And, people talk about the standard library being brilliant. The standard library is brilliant. I love the standard library so much. It's got some great abstractions in it. Learn from those abstractions. Use those abstractions. Build upon them. Don't just say, well, we've got this fantastic IO reader here. That's all I need for the rest of my life. I'm done. So that might be my unpopular opinion. Maybe it's popular. I don't know.
Very compelling. Interesting. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I've definitely kind of advocated for avoiding abstractions until the time is right, because, early abstraction, I think, is a sin, or can be. But you're right. It kind of depends. And you're also right. Like, the right abstraction, which is why I think there is a lot of people talking against it, because actually it is the goal. It's the kind of gold. It's gold when you find a good abstraction for something. If you could model that idea in some way, because it is such an enabler, isn't it? It lets other people then kind of work in this way without also and plug in to your work. So that's very interesting. Chris, do you think that's unpopular or what?
I think it might be a little unpopular. I think it's fine for people to have a healthy skepticism to abstractions. Like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I think we've all worked in code bases where, you know, the abstractions are working against you because they're just wrong. And I hope that many people have been lucky enough to write some bad abstractions. I think about the first few years of my career, I was going nuts. I was just doing, you know, I was just like trying to, I was thinking I was being overly clever. I was trying to abstract everything, make everything cool and all this kind of business. And, you know, and it didn't work out all the time, but I wouldn't take time doing it. And to add to Dave's thing, like my worry is that you need to exercise that muscle. You need to work hard at it and you need to fail before you get good at it. Like you have to keep practicing and keep trying it out. And coming back to the whole world of TDD and things, like I genuinely feel what's nice about TDD is it gives you a bit of freedom to play around this kind of business. When I was doing my abstractions in the Stone Age, I didn't have automated tests, so I was just rerunning the application every time and seeing what on earth was happening. So, you know, nowadays, all you kids, you can write tests and get fast feedback. So I agree with Dave's sentiment, but there's a lot of nuance to it, as with everything.
Yeah.
There's no nuance. Just be angry all the time. That's hard. Sorry.
Riya, what do you think about abstractions? What's your take on it currently? Is it something that you strive for? Is it something you avoid?
Well, with my 2 years of experience, yes, I think like I'm at that point where I'm just kind of like, I think I'm just going out there and doing what I think like looks good. And in my eyes, when I see a nice like abstraction that looks nice, I'm like, yeah, I did a good job. But obviously there are times when it isn't good. And there has been one time though, I remember doing something, and because of an abstraction, we saw something and we did the gathering that we call it, and it actually made us like put our code back together in a better way. Yeah, I hope I explained that well. But
what's the gathering? Sounds like a horror film.
Maybe Dave and Chris could explain that.
That's all on Chris. I think it sounds like a horror film, but that's me.
Okay, I'll try. A lot of people talk about separation of concerns, right? About trying to pull things apart, you know, to make things small and all that kind of business. But a lot of people miss the cohesion side of this kind of design discussion about how a lot of things that people don't do in a design software is finding this bit over here and this bit over here and going, oh, actually, these two things, they're related. Like every time I want to change this behavior, I end up going to this file and this file and this file. And that's happened over and over again. What I should be telling you is that actually these things belong together. They're changing for the same reason. So if you bring them into a cohesive thing, or you do the gathering, then you know you stand a chance of improving your code.
That was a software pattern that was put together by Stephen King originally, I think. Do we have any other unpopular opinions?
All right, well, I do. I think a lot of people talk about CI and they say they do CI. But when you ask them what their process is, it's not continuous integration, it's continuous isolation. And what I mean by that is CI was invented because the extreme programmers at the time, they realized that a big pain in projects was, you know, this group of developers working over here and this group of developers working over here, but they were working in isolation. And when you try to bring the units together, that's when you cause a lot of problems and a lot of pain. And nowadays, it seems like the default position is to work with pull requests. And they end up suffering these same problems of people working in isolation and not really working together. And and when they integrate things, they end up having merge conflicts and all this other kind of hassle. So to sum up the unpopular opinion, I would say if you have a group of trusted developers, like you have a team who work together, I think you should look into Trump-based development because it's far simpler process to work in. And again, coming back to this idea of feedback loops, your feedback loops are way tightened because you're just all working on one branch effectively. I think PRs are great for open source software because you want to welcome contributions from other people and you don't have implicit trust. But presumably you trust your teammates. So you don't need that overhead. You don't need that ceremony. You should just commit to main and get on with your lives.
That's not unpopular with me. That's exactly how I do it. Just push straight into main. Yeah, nice one.
Only way to live. Only way to live.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have. I feel like we really only sort of scratched the surface of tester development and testing generally. If you wanted to learn Go with tests, are there any resources that you could use for that, Chris?
There is a free open source book called Learn Go with Tests, which will both teach you Go and TDD. So yeah, you should go visit it and even contribute. I'm trying to work through the pull requests at the moment, but I do welcome contributions and feedback. Oh, it's also available in Chinese, Portuguese, Korean, possibly Japanese as well, if that's really what you like.
Oh, I suppose if you speak those languages already, that'd be useful as well. Yeah. Wow, that's really great. And people have contributed those translations, have they? Because no offense, you don't strike me as intelligent enough to be able to do all that yourself.
No, it's fair. I am a typical British person who just hasn't learned other languages. No, that's yeah. I mean, basically, what happened was people from I think the first one was the Brazilian Go community. Some people reached out and said, can we translate this? And I was like, go for it. I'm incredibly flattered that you do that. And they're incredibly organized. They actually have a number of people doing it. And I follow the projects. I mean, all the comments are in Portuguese, obviously, I can't understand it, but it looks cool. It looks like they're doing some good stuff.
Wow, that is so good. I love that happens. And it's great that you chose to do that as a kind of free open source thing for everybody. Because I've got a book, Go Programming Blueprints, 2nd edition, still available, but people have to pay for that. So I'd really admire that, Chris.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that as well. Even though I know it sounded sarcastic.
It didn't sound sincere at all, but it's I get it. I mean, yeah, it's one of these things where I didn't intend it to be like that at all. I just had some free time, and I had a perception that there wasn't a lot of TDD material for Go, so I thought, well, I'll just make a Hello World tutorial on TDD, and it just kind of blew up. And I think if there's one thing I'd say to the listeners is if you like a project, tell the person that you like it, because it's such a motivator. Like, there's no way I would have written all that stuff if I hadn't had such warm feedback about it. I just, I would have stopped at Hello World. But people telling me they'd help them and, they understand TD a bit better, all that kind of stuff. It makes my day when I hear that kind of stuff. So if you enjoy someone's project, just reach out to them and tell them.
That's lovely. And Riya, also, thank you for the work you do helping people. It's great. One of the things I love about the Go community is that we do encourage kind of diversity where other communities don't. And we get the benefit of it. So that's the thing. We're all kind of, our lives are all richer for it. So thank you. And I know it's not easy. It takes a lot of effort. So that's great. Dave, do you do anything nice, mate?
No. I one of my unpopular opinions might be about my 2.5-year-old daughter, who basically soaks all the time out of my life and gave me 1.5 hours sleep last night.
Oh,
so if I'm in any way incoherent and angry, it's mainly her. Who I love my daughter. Sorry, God, this is gonna be recorded, and she's gonna listen to this when she's like 12 or something. And oh man,
yeah, 12-year-old
definitely will.
Love you. Yeah, she'll be a Go programmer. I can tell.
Oh yeah,
gonna get all the plushies. It's gonna be great.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening. This has been great Chris, Dave, Riya, thank you so much. You'll have to come back anytime. We'd love to have you. And we'll see you next time on Go Time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Matt.
Chris, a couple of times during that.
The jingle's still playing, so.
A couple of times during that,
You cut out, mate.
you sounded like Predator from Predator 2.
Oh no, I don't know what to say.
Well, that's why we do the local audio recording. You won't notice on the podcast, but it's
hopefully be right.
For that, for Chris's internet connection.
It's normally really good as well. That's quite unusual. Oh.
You're on Netflix as well. You're on Fastly.
To be fair, my partner might be looking at it. It wouldn't surprise me. I said to her, I'm going to be on a podcast. You got to watch, and she was probably like, yeah.
It's easy enough, mate.
Yeah, it's true. I really enjoyed that, but I feel like, as you said, Matt, there's still a million things we didn't talk about. TDD.
Yeah, no,
Probably entire podcast dedicated to the conversation, don't you think? There's got to be TDD podcasts. Point being, I think you probably talk about these things weekly.
Yeah, the testing as a subject is a massive subject, and it's kind of constantly evolving. I find that the way I deal with testing changes quite a lot all the time, and so it's kind of I feel like there is a great subject there to pick into. But
I think it's just because implicitly testing is about software design, right? Like the way you design your software affects the way you write your test, even if you're not doing TD, right? The way your software is designed affects the way you write your tests. So therefore, it basically encompasses everything. In a way.
And does lead to that, I can't write my tests. Why can't I write tests? This code is untestable. And it's like, TDD, mate.
It's a red flag, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good. Enjoyed it. Yeah, originally we were thinking we'd go to a pub and do an out.
Oh, this was the pub show.
Yeah, this was going to be it, but it didn't happen. But we should at some point try and do that, because that would be kind of fun.
Well, considering Chris's connection at his house or wherever you're located, I think at a pub would be even more fraught, don't you?
See, now I
You
can't.
could just 5G it. You can just connect to your phone.
Yeah,
and stream from there.
If we all get our vaccines, apparently that gives you 5G. So
that's right.
It hasn't. Well, maybe it's the opposite because I'm fully jabbed, and
your internet's not good.
Yeah, maybe the 5G was interrupting the Wi-Fi or something. I don't know. I'm not a computer person.
I did read one that said you get Bluetooth, and I thought, does that mean you have to read the spec to be able to do anything with it? How do you choose which channel you're going to be on?
It's Bluetooth. I hear you have Bluetooth low energy for about 24 hours.
Yeah.
On the second stab, you get low energy. All right. Are we done with the technology / medical puns? You got any more?
Just thinking about I've done 5G, Bluetooth. I can't remember the others. There's a few conspiracy theories that I like to make fun of, really, if we're honest. It's the silent. Oh, hang on.
Well, there's the lab leak conspiracy.
Sorry?
The lab leak conspiracy.
What's that one?
Oh, that's the one that leaked out of a lab. Which
you
couldn't say that for about 9 months.
Yeah. Now you can say that.
Now you can say it again.
Incredible.
So that's a hot topic.
Man.
We have to find out from evidence.
Bad thing had to be somebody's fault. Probably not.
Yeah. Wouldn't need to be, would it?
I think it was Batman.
In nature. Batman.
That's a new conspiracy. Batman.
Yeah.
Batman.
Da-na-na-na-na.
Dinner. I mean, I love that Batman. That that camp Batman TV program. They should do that again. They should get it with Christian Bale though this time. That'd be brilliant. He'd love to do it, wouldn't he?
Oh, that would be great.
Boy Wonder and that.
Yeah. Just an awful costume running around.
Yeah, with the kaplawi and the kabam. I'm for it. I'm sick of the real world gritty, troubled superhero. It's like, give us capes and cowls again. Let's return to form. Why not?
Yeah, it was good fun. Yeah. I couldn't even see what was going on in Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's so dark. So dark. So bloody long. I can see why you cut it, for God's sake.
Yeah, it was long. I did. I watched it over a few days.
The mini series. Yeah, that worked well for me.
It's like force feeding. You just kind of force fed it.
Man.
They're all right, aren't they?
All right, y'all. Well, you can stop your local recordings.
Oh,
and
shit.
I will put into the Zoom. You can just name it Go Time, your name.
Yeah, we're
Where
still
your
live.
name's
Did I
a place-
swear?
Your name's a placeholder.
Did I ever swear?
Just like to
I
apologise.
don't think you did.
Did he swear?
I'm like this sweariest person. When did I swear? Oh my God, when did I do it?
It's just a soft one.
Was it
Soft swear.
a D? A B?
The D word?
Oh,
The H word?
Said.
I said what?
I'll text you.
I'll text you.
Think this is what?
H-E
I
double
don't think
hockey
you
stick?
did.
Did, mate. Are you still
Okay.
recording, Dave?
I've stopped recording.
I don't remember Dave swearing, but I'm so accustomed to working with him that it just sort of, I don't know, it's all just white noise.
It's just a wall of swearing normally.
Yeah,
My
like a-
unpopular opinion, I just dropped all the Fs that were in between every other word.
Yeah.
I
Right.
fully regret my unpopular opinion, and it wasn't worth talking about because you already talked about it. So I was like, oh no, I couldn't think of anything on the spot in time.
That's
Oh well.
I was so looking forward to you burning some bridges, Ria. I'm really sad that you didn't say
so
something
young
outrageous.
and yet no career now.
Yeah, after switching career, that would be sad.
I like the tax thing when you in your intro. It says you. What did it say?
It was
In
like,
tax disputes.
Yeah.
can we get some
Well,
kind of
I
like
thought-
audio soundtrack of a big boo thing just to do with taxes?
Ooh, tax.
Some kind of cheesy addition.
I mean, I always tell myself I worked in this most fun part of tax, which is tax disputes. It's like HMRC and people fighting. Whereas I didn't do like tax compliance, which is filling out tax forms or making somebody's tax plan more efficient and all of that boring stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. I like that too. That could be a good podcast. Tax disputes.
Mm.
Genuinely would be interesting.
Sounds great, yeah.
I mean, the cases that we had were pretty good. I worked for like a company where we had football players and stuff. It was quite interesting actually.
Chris, I would say, in addition to your audio, it looks like you've been slowly descending
Yeah.
into darkness.
I was going to turn a light on. Hold on.
Not getting dark. Do you know what? I woke up the other day at 3:30 a.m. and it was daytime outside.
How'd that work?
What? Are you in Iceland?
London. Do you
What
realise how
happened?
late it gets?
Is that how it always works?
We're quite far north on the planet, so
That's
Like-
true.
in the winter, it's like gets dark at 4:30 p.m. And now it doesn't. I don't think it gets dark. Well, it does, but barely.
So how far
There you
north? Walthamstow? Sorry.
Oh, I didn't see it. So we're supposed to upload our thing to...
There you go. I put it in the Zoom chat.
There's a
Yeah.
link.
Click on that. It's a Dropbox uploader. You can just
We don't
drop
say
your
this,
file in there.
we don't say that out loud because anyone could then upload anything. Into
Oh, I see.
Don't say the URL.
yeah.
We could get DDoSed with distributed MP3s.
Drag stuff there. Go Time FM. David Wickes. M4A. That should be done.
Cool.
One thing that might come up during my recording was my cat was scratching the amp behind me during the episode. So hopefully that doesn't come through.
Is she trying to turn you up or turn you down?
I don't know. I assumed that she was being passive aggressive about it somehow. Yeah.
Like a guitar amp with a soft
Yeah.
front or something. That's probably great.
She's a big fan of BDD, so that's mainly why
Yeah.
she's just like, talk about BDD. Talk about that some more. Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick one. Did you say we could just write go time dash our name, or was
Yeah.
it something else?
No, that's plenty.
Yeah, I think I've done it.
Cool. So our show is on a 1-week production schedule. That being said, I think we have 2 in the can because we were at GopherCon. So we recorded 2 that week. So this should go out, I believe, 2 weeks from Thursday. But you all are in our system, so our robots will email you. You'll also see it on Twitter and whatnot. You won't miss it. And we send a Go Time t-shirt to each and every guest. So in that email, make sure to read to the end. There's a coupon code to our Shopify for you to snag a free t-shirt on us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Chris, looks like you maybe didn't read that far in the email last time.
Yeah, I was just saying to Dave before, I was like, I didn't get a t-shirt last time, but
You didn't
maybe
get
I'm okay. It's fine. I will claim my t-shirt this
You have
time.
to claim it. Yeah.
You have to read, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, reading emails is not my forte.
Maybe we sent yours to Rick James.
I really wish I had just got in with that now. I
Just the
mean,
joke so good I had to use it twice. All right. Anything else, folks? We can say goodbye to the live audience. We can all hit stop and we can
All time.
call it a day. Did you guys know we're still live on YouTube? I guess I didn't. We never said.
how
the
many
date.
No.
how many
I
thousands
did
of
not
people
know
were
that.
watching?
You didn't know that.
Did I
Yeah.
swear live on YouTube? Yeah, I thought this could be a whole new thing.
I
I've got no
hope
clue
so.
anymore.
Now you can go back and watch that, so it'll stay up there. I'm not sure if you did, but if you sing a song too well, you will get us demonetized. Because
Ooh.
that's why we won't let Matt sing a cappella.
She's a super freak. Super freak. She's super freak. Yeah.
All right, we'll
Is
see if that qualifies.
okay?
This could be a new game, Matt.
Yeah, actually, it's really good if you can.
Yeah.
Get us demonetized.
Yeah.
Go time karaoke.
Yeah.
Gonna have to tell Rio who Rick James is quite soon. That's gonna be hard work.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
this is-
Dave thinks I'm basically a teenager.
She is. She's a teenager. 12 years old or something. Ridiculous. Okay.
Oh,
Cool.
I love how we ended that.
Gotcha. Well, the post show doesn't go into the show except for when it's really good. Then we put it back in anyway. So stay tuned.
Oh well, thank goodness we were really boring there.
I think Super Freak might make it in though. Super Freak might make it in. It was really boring for a minute, but then we revitalized it at the end there. So we'll see.
if you have that clip, then that could be the way it opens, and it's just not mentioned again in the episode.
It could be just the opening. Yeah. Just really leave them confused to start the show.
It could be Dave's intro.
Yeah, exactly.
Only people who know who Rick James is will understand the reference, which is
right.
good.
I
This is
know
how I
who
like
Rick
it.
James is.
Be like,
Yes,
it's time for unpopular opinions. It's a super freak.
Although there has been one person now. If we get a couple more, we have to do it. That says we need a new theme song for Unpop.
Well, I think it's
So,
really good.
Ah,
that was their unpopular opinion, is that our unpopular opinion jingle is outdated. It's overused.
well,
It's pretty meta.
the Beatles. Go after them first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Go after me for.
That's what I said. Go after Matt Ryer. I didn't perform it.
I have to go. My wife is demanding I eat dinner. So there we
All right,
go.
thanks
You
everybody.
did this on an empty
sorry.
stomach? Jesus, man.
Same.
Hence the,
And without
What?
cursing, man, you really
don't know how I fucking
Delivered.
did that. Sorry.
still on YouTube. Come
Oh wait.
on.
Oh, that's
All right.